Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. Thank you for being here. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined by Dr. Scott Nelson. Hello, sir.
Hello, dude.
Scott is actually the president of the board of Let's Fix This in this year. So
It's true.
thanks for doing that. Bailey Perkins could not be with us today. She's taking a vacation day, and I'm jealous. I'll be honest. That sounds lovely. I don't know what she's doing today, but she is not here and didn't go to work. So I'm hopefully she's, I don't know, napping or somewhere not thinking about coronavirus.
That's right.
As if that's possible. Do you think anyone in America, I guess someone out there is not thinking about it right this moment, but it feels like it plagues our minds all the time.
It does, man. It does. It's really terrible and not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I had a meeting today, an actual in-person meeting, which was like good and anxiety provoking at the same time. Everyone showed up with their masks and we did the thing and all that. And I was like, it's so good to see you in person. But at the same time, like I can feel myself like kind of holding my breath a little bit and like just there's this like meta thought that's overarching everything else. And our conversation, I think, mimicked that we would talk about city council and we would talk about the county commissioners and we'd talk about schools and higher ed, just kind of weaving through all the topics. But we just kept coming back to like COVID.
Have you gotten to this point? I only recently got to this point, but it's happened to me a couple times. I was watching an episode of Veep last night, and of course this is from like 2012. And there's an episode where one of the aides is like sick, and he's getting everybody else sick, and he's sitting across the desk from Julia Louis-Dreyfus's chief of staff, and he like sneezes, and in my head I was like, "Where's your mask, dude? Why did you have a mask? You're in somebody's office. Why aren't you guys wearing masks?" I was like, "Oh, because this was the pre-times."
Yeah,
the sneeze was just
that's right.
A sneeze was just a sneeze.
BC before COVID. It is weird. I mean, one of the people I was with today sneezed, and it was a very tiny sneeze, and you could kind of tell like something had been tickling her nose, and she looked horrified at the fact, and we both kind of looked at her like, was that it? Like, was that the moment I got infected? And, everyone had masks and all that, but it was still like a weird, terrifying moment. I had a mask on the other day. I was in the parking lot at Lowe's and I had to sneeze. And like, you look around and you think, should I take my mask off to sneeze?
No.
And you're like, no, that's the whole point of wearing it, right?
It's literally what it's for.
And by the same token, if someone took it off, you would theoretically sneeze into your elbow, which is an ad hoc mask, right? Like the vampire sneeze is an arm mask.
I had a patient ask me that they needed to sneeze. There was like, so I just sneeze in my ass? No, not in your ass. Do I just sneeze in my mask? And I said, yes, you do. And in fact, it's actually still helpful to go ahead and because the masks are like they're semi-permeable, right? So
right.
It's helpful to actually go ahead and still cover your mouth and nose and whatnot with your elbow or what have you.
Right.
So like you should do that too, but also with the mask on. But that's like the whole point. Right. I'm interested to see what pop culture is gonna do, like with the pandemic. Like at what point? Like so there are some shows that like never deal with major life things like so Friends, right? Friends like was in the middle of their run when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
They took a hiatus when it happened, but then they came back and like the intro changed and it didn't show the towers anymore, but like they never ever addressed 9/11 like on the show. Like 9/11 didn't happen in the universe that the show takes place in. And so I wonder for shows that are on now, and I'll be honest, I don't even know like which ones it would be because a lot of my favorite shows just ended. But like when and how will they address the pandemic? Like, are we going to see shows that have episodes that take place where people are wearing masks? Or is there going to be a thing that like this happened in the real world, but it didn't happen in the universe in which our favorite like movies and television shows take place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, not obviously not every show like had 9/11 happen, even if they were set in New York, like you said. And I've seen that a number of shows have like delayed production for this fall or this summer because of COVID. And so, yeah, like in theory, if these shows are mimicking real life, they would then like have everyone be masked all the time, and it would weave into the storylines. I would assume at least like medical shows like ER, that's still on, isn't it? Are they still making new episodes?
ER was canceled in 2008, I think, was their last season.
Really?
Yeah.
Not ER. Oh, I'm thinking of Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy is still on.
Oh yeah, I want to say Grey's Anatomy is in season like 17 or something. Just
That's
absurd.
Nuts. Someone will have to wear a mask and then have paddles, right? And that's the whole.
That's right. That's what the Grey's Anatomy fix to every medical problem is defibrillation. That's what you do. You shock. No matter what's wrong, you shock them.
That's right. And friend of the pod, Effie Craven, has been watching Grey's Anatomy, and she texted Scott and I the other day about it, and no joke, there was a scene with a deer where there were 5 surgeons and a defibrillator that rescued a deer. And she made the point that like that deer better hope those surgeons are in network, otherwise they're going to get a hefty bill. Hefty bill. Deer's
going to go to deer bankruptcy court for his emergency services that were provided out of network.
Yeah, just nuts. Well, let's since we talked about COVID already, and we usually start with that. Scott, how are we doing in our COVID quest?
Very, very bad indeed. No, it seems like it's getting better. I mean, like the trend line is now for the 7-day rolling average, I want to say is at its lowest point since July the 20th. Coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, that seems to coincide with when some of the major metros around the state implemented mandatory masking. You're starting to see a significant drop in daily case reports. Today was up a little bit higher. It was 794, I believe, here in Oklahoma, which is up, I think, a little bit from yesterday, but still down significantly, from 1,000 that we were seeing a week to 10 days ago. So that's an improvement for sure. We have had several school districts. Open back up. Saw yesterday, Oklahoma City public schools, they made it one day before there was a COVID exposure at school facilities. I saw Moore has confirmed today that a child apparently went to school knowingly. Moore Public Schools has informed parents that a student attended the first day of in-person classes after testing positive for COVID-19.
Oh, come on.
So that happened in Moore. There was, let me find it here. There's another school district around the country that I want to say, Carly Putnam, who is a policy aficionado from the Oklahoma Policy Institute. She had a tweet. She's like, what a difference 17 hours could make. There's a school district that opened yesterday, and this is Kanawha Public Schools.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great day here at Kanawha Public Schools. That was yesterday. Today, we're closing at noon today. There's been a COVID exposure. We're closing at noon. Buses running at noon. We're sending everyone home.
So, and we've heard those stories. Kingston had like a food service worker that tested positive, so they had to notify like all 900 families at the school. And I think this is what's going to happen, right? As schools, I mean, every week more districts are opening, and almost immediately in every district, at least one school or the entire district is having to close in response. And Scott, if you remember back in March when we first started talking about this, there was this idea that like we were going to end up with rolling closures, right?
Right.
But when we talked about it in those terms, we talked about like full close down, like community level city shutdown stuff like we had in the beginning. And now what we're seeing is individual businesses and school districts. And the difference, I think, and what strikes me as more difficult is that as a parent of children who are scheduled to start school next Friday, is that trying to plan when part of your life has to go to school and part of your life has to go to work, and then what happens when that closes, right? Like then you've got to scramble for childcare or adjust your own schedule, and it makes it really difficult for the economy to proceed at a predictable pace, right? Like it's hard for businesses to plan. It's hard, whether it's a big office business, whether it's a retail place. Like when you have people that are unreliably there, students, employees, whatever, it makes it really hard for things to continue.
Yeah. So, and yeah, just to our local, one of our local NPR affiliates, KGOU down Norman, they've got a running list of all of the schools where state impact has found announcements or news reports of active case discoveries. So we've got active coronavirus cases in Bennington Public Schools, Kingston Public Schools, McAllister, Westward Lower Elementary School, which is in Colbert, Hartshorn, Shawnee, Newcastle, Marietta, Bishop Kelly, which is Catholic private school in Tulsa. 33 Broken Arrow staff members have tested positive, so they're delaying their start. Middell has 4 staff members who tested positive. Boswell Public Schools is online after 2 teachers test positive. Dixon Public Schools had some positive tests. Fort Townsend, Yukon, Kanawha, and then Westmore High School. So,
Wow.
and it's been it's been less than a week.
Yeah, and I mean, not all districts are open yet.
Right, and there's a great line by Ian Malcolm, Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, one of the seminal films of my childhood, where they visit the park and they're seeing the dinosaurs, and Dr. Malcolm says, "John, you were so worried about whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think about whether or not you should."
Yeah.
And that is, I feel like, how we got here. We shut down, we flattened the curve, and we did really, really well. But we were so invested in opening, quote, opening the economy as quickly as possible from, I think, a legitimate concern of wanting to minimize the economic fallout, which is a real concern, right? The economy,
Sure, yeah.
that's not a non-issue. But it seems like we were preoccupied with wanting to do it as fast as possible and wanting to be, for various reasons, wanting to be able to say that we were the first in the country or one of the first in the country to, quote, reopen our economy. And so what happened is, as cases were peaking again, we're in the position, well, now we have to open schools, right? Like, rather than opening schools when we had daily case counts at less than 100 and, state positive test results at 1 or 2%, we opened schools with daily case counts at 1,000 and positive test results of 7 or 8%. And this is what happens, right? So,
Right.
It's unfortunate. Oklahoma City Public Schools, they are online for a minimum, I think, of the first 9 weeks, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then possibly even longer, depending on what the situation is. I think what you're going to see is that the vast majority of the kids are going to be online for sure for the fall semester, maybe after that. Now, one thing that will be interesting. A lot of people were hopeful that as we got into the summer months, that the virus would kind of, tend to level out or decrease, as we see that happens with flu. Obviously, that did not happen. And everybody is predicting that fall is going to be particularly awful, and that certainly may be the case. But one thing that may help us here in Oklahoma in the next few months is if, as we get into September, if we have a decent and ideally a long fall, that may be beneficial because it means that people can go outside.
Right. Sure.
Like, it's miserable out. Like, I don't want to be outside today, right? Everybody wants to be inside, and everybody wants to be inside with their air conditioning systems running full blast.
Right.
Like, I don't want to go sit on a patio and have dinner right now, right? Like, it's freaking 90. My parents came by. My parents were in the area last night. They said, "Do you want to, as we do now, do you want to come out and like chat in the yard for a minute before we drive home?" And I said, "Sure." At 8:30, I was standing in my front yard, dripping, and my only physical exertion was lifting my wine glass to my lips.
Right.
And I was dripping with sweat at 8:30. Okay,
Yeah.
So like, if we can get past that and get to where we can do a lot more outside, we're not having so many people cooped up inside all the time. We may, I'm not predicting, but I think it's at least possible that you can see that further help us kind of curb the spread a little bit and maybe be in a better place heading in to like the core winter months.
Yeah, man, who knows? So, kind of in summary, then of the COVID update, it looks like overall it's decreasing, although again not super steeply, right? Like the trend line, the 7-day average trend line is going down and not going as quickly as we'd like. Somebody the other day also had a tweet, I believe, that showed that cases in metro areas, cases in areas that have mask mandates
are declining much more sharply.
Yeah. And so most of those districts you mentioned happen to be the ones that are open, but those are the districts that are in rural areas. And so if those rural areas are also seeing increases, there was an article you were reading earlier about Boise City, right?
Yeah, and they had thought that they were one of the they didn't have any cases there, and they thought we've done it, we've missed the Rona has passed over us, we're doing fine. But now they had a teachers meeting, and now there's an outbreak,
right?
And this is
one person has it.
Right.
They're in the room. Yep.
And I've ranted at least twice, who knows how many times, about this idea that, if there's no known active cases in your area, then you don't have to wear masks. And this shows why that's very misguided. The way that you stay at no active cases is by wearing masks.
Right. It's true if there's no cases, but if you don't know that there's no cases, right?
Which
if you don't know there's a case.
Yes, which is often the case, the case that you don't know the case is in fact often the case.
Right. And I've made this parallel before, right? But when it comes to sexually transmitted infections, when I was working in the public health field, you just tell everyone wear barrier protection because you don't know, right? You can't look at someone and necessarily tell that they have a sexually transmitted disease. In fact, they might not know either. And so you should protect yourself.
Also quite common.
Right. Yes.
To not know that you have a sexually transmitted disease.
Right. We all just know about the gross parts of the health textbook, right? Of discharge and smell and those things. But that is not always the case. By that time, the person is aware, usually for various reasons, and they've had it for a long time.
Not always, though. I mean, there's HPV. This is HPV is a classic example of an STD that is an STI, excuse me, that is super. HPV is super, super common and often causes no symptoms, particularly in men. And I fight this battle. I shouldn't say fight this battle. I have this discussion with parents all the time who don't want to vaccinate their 11-year-olds against HPV. And they're like, why are you vaccinating my 11-year-old against a sexually transmitted infection? I'm like, because I'm assuming your 11-year-old hasn't had sex yet. And I would like to inoculate them before they do.
That's right.
The time vaccinating against HPV is not when they're 25 and they've had 4 sexual partners. If they don't have it yet, great. But ideally we would have got them beforehand.
Right. The point of a vaccine is to prevent the infection, not to treat the infection.
Yes.
All right, well, let's pivot away from COVID a bit. I wanted to talk about higher ed for a moment because I had an interesting conversation with a couple of different faculty members from a couple of different universities this week, and both of them kind of shared the same frustration, and that's that universities across the country are struggling with how to justify their value proposition, right? We all know that universities provide degrees, and presumably provide education as well. But I think the conversation about athletics has helped highlight this, that right now universities are trying to justify why they can charge students the full price when students don't have access to all the things, right? It's you can't go to the lab or the library or that kind of stuff. And if you're not going to live there, why do I pay the same amount? And it feels like most universities don't have a good answer to this. And I think the answer is right there. It should be that the price that students pay is not just for the piece of paper that's the degree, although I think that's what we all commonly associate with college. But if a university is doing a good job at recruiting faculty, the price that you pay reflects the access to top tier faculty, right? The best and brightest minds in their field, and arguably the networking, right? Both with students and with your faculty members. And so you would think that Ivy League school like Harvard, right? That costs a bajillion dollars a year. You go there because the faculty there are better in some qualitative way than the faculty at Midwest South University. It's just some fictitious, small liberal arts college, right? But every university of every size is struggling with this. And I want to get your opinion as someone who has, attended higher education facilities and see what you think about the value of higher ed and how it translates into the COVID times.
I mean, that's a great question. And there's a lot of different ways you could go with it, I think, right? I mean, I think you're right. I think that if a university is doing what it should, then the value should come from the experience you have with professors, yes, but also with your classmates, right? I mean, like, I think, I think that what's the best way to put this? I think if a university is doing a good job at kind of selecting its students, what you would hope is that part of the education you get at a university is not just from the professors, but it's also from the other learners, right? Like, hopefully you're being pushed and challenged and learning from different ideas and perspectives and different points of view that come from, again, hopefully being surrounded by people that are coming from a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences and perspectives and things that maybe allow you to read the same essay and take away two entirely different points from it, right? Like,
Yeah, but you can still get that with an online environment.
100%, you can, for sure, and that's why I think that maybe some universities feel like they're justified in charging the same, because if you have, if you're at a small private liberal arts school and you're in a freshman seminar. I mean, I went to two universities. I went to Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, which is a small private liberal arts school. And then I went to OU, and at Trinity, I had to take a freshman seminar, and there was like maybe 18 people in that class. I mean, I get on Zoom board meetings now that have way more than 18 people, and there's good discussion. And so I think you can have like a good, vigorous online discussion with a class like that, and still get a lot of value from it. Now, I mean, does that justify universities charging full tuition? I don't know. I don't think there's any justification for charging room and board when you can't live there. Like, that's,
well, right. Yeah.
I think the university's position has to be like, look, there is overhead that we pay on those buildings, whether they're occupied or not. And like, that money has to come from somewhere. Like, that's not the student's problem, but it's a reality of that university if they want to continue to exist. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, does that make sense at all? Like,
yeah. And I think the issue is not, I think we all agree universities provide value. They provide education, and I think the beef that these faculty members had with the situation, and I think it's well founded, it has more to do with messaging around that, right? Like, and it struck me that, when you think about, let's say, the Instagram feeds that you see for virtually any university, what are those feeds full of? Photos of attractive students, right? Like, maybe a beautiful campus, and like, here's all the beautiful people you can come be around and all of this. And if that is not an option right now, like, you are not offering that, you are only offering the education side of that, why aren't universities, well, I won't say why aren't, I believe universities would be smart to like fill their social media feeds, their marketing materials right now of like, you should come to this, like, you should come to OU rather than OCCC, because we offer these faculty. Like, you want to attend, if you got to attend online, I think that consumers are like, if I have to go online, I'm going to go to the cheapest online school because that's right. the deal, right?
Right.
But universities, in trying to differentiate themselves from one another, is that they should be saying, you got to go online anyway. You should come to our school because we have the best faculty. Like, you're going to get a better education.
Sure.
And I just don't think that gets emphasized. And this is real interesting that so many schools are like, well, we got to open because that's what we offer. And it's like, do you not offer excellent faculty and excellent educations? Because why aren't you touting that rather than being like, we've got football?
I mean, so I would say two things. I would say, obviously, I think faculty make a huge difference. I will say that all the faculty, not all, the faculty that had the most influence on my college career were faculty members that I had later, right? Like, that they're faculty members that I had declared my major. I was in my concentration. Like, sure. you're kind of narrowed down the departments that you're in. So you're working with like a certain group of people in kind of all your classes. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, does it, I mean, Does it matter who teaches freshman composition? In my opinion, yes, it does. Right? I think class size matters more than probably anything for some of the entry level coursework.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that like star faculty are very important, but I think that they tend to be more important at kind of the latter half of your college career and in graduate school more than in the first half. Like, is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
And so that may be one reason why, like, if you're trying to push for people to come like enroll at my school, right? Like, it doesn't make sense if you're OU to push like, oh, come enroll at our school because we have this amazing professor and she's the world's leading researcher in this certain sect of like microbiology. Yeah, if you're one of the like 8 people that take her capstone microbiology course, that's like a huge deal for you, right?
Right.
If you're one of the 500 people that enter OU every year and says that they're gonna like major in biology because they want to be a doctor or a dentist or whatever, and then go on to do something else, then that doesn't matter very much at all.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. And even with my my MBA, like I had some faculty that were outstanding and some that were adequate, right? Like they were fine. So it obviously is not everybody, but just from a marketing, public relations aspect, it seems like a glaring omission or oversight, or just maybe it's just another example of an industry that has struggled to grapple with the far-reaching ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they need a little help figuring that out. Okay, so let's talk for a second, Scott, because you and I are both big fans of 538, Nate Silver's outfit over there. Then they do a lot of election-related stuff.
We're big nerds.
We are, and in fact, I'm wearing my 538 politics t-shirt right now. So they released their election forecast this week, and this is a big deal to at least you and I, and maybe some of our listeners as well. And while we don't normally talk about national stuff, this is, I think in my world, like this is a big benchmark deal. 538 caught a lot of flack after the 2016 election because people said, you got it wrong, and they were very clear of like, you misunderstood what a percentage chance means. And so
you did not study probability.
Right. So as of today, we're recording this on August 14th, the 538 forecast has Biden with a 73 out of 100 chance of winning. That gives Trump a 27 out of 100 chance of winning. And that is based on 40,000 simulations that their computer system runs. And then they kind of plot those, the highest chance. They have some really excellent graphics this year. If you go to 538.com, all spelled out, not the numbers, but the letters, it's pretty interesting. And I just saw Nate tweet a few minutes ago that he wants to acknowledge that while the forecast gives Trump a roughly 27% chance at winning, which is not insignificant, right? Like if there's a lottery that said you have a 1 in 4 chance of winning, you would definitely play that lottery. So it's not an insignificant chance that he could win, but the uncertainty runs both ways. And so it also means that he has roughly a 33% chance of suffering the worst electoral loss since Carter or something.
Hoover.
Woof. Yeah, that's right. Even worse than Carter. And so that is a really big deal.
Yeah, and when you look at the model, so they a little bit about the model for people that don't follow 538. They update it multiple times a day every time they get new polling data, and then when it's updated with new information, it runs roughly 40,000 simulations, and comes up with a distribution, a probabilistic distribution of outcomes. And in the most recent data set, for this most recent set of 40,000 simulations, it shows that Vice President Biden wins 73% of the time, with the President Trump winning 27% of the time. But the mode, so the most frequent value in the data set, right, the outcome that happens most often, is Biden with like 420-ish electoral votes, which would be like pretty substantial. That's a lot. It's interesting though, because there's several models. Real clear politics has a model. Crystal Ball has a model. There's several different models, and most of them are giving President Trump much less than a 27% chance. They're feeling much more bullish about the vice president. And 538's argument is like, look, there's a ton of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty from the coronavirus. There's a lot of uncertainty given that we're 4 months out from an election. And so they're actually a lot more bearish on the vice president and a lot more bullish on President Trump. But so they are forecasting what they think is going to happen 4 months from now. They would say, though, that if you change the model, if you change the inputs to say that the election is at 4 months from now, that you tell the model the election is tomorrow, the vice president has like a 95% chance of winning or something like that. So if you guys are not, if you're listening to us, you probably are frequent 538, but if you don't, you should. I think it's about the best data-driven political analysis out there, with a close second. The New York Times, Upshot at the New York Times, does a fantastic job as well. Nick Cohn runs a great organization over there.
Also new this year with the election forecast is I'm going to say that again because I heard you sniffle real loud.
Sorry.
Also new this year with the 538 forecast is 5e Fox, a little character that is in all the pictures, which is I
haven't decided how I feel about him yet.
I know I saw a tweet that had the Carfax or the Carfax Fox plus Clippy, the paperclip from Microsoft Word, equals 5e Fox, and I think that is a very accurate summary of what it looks like. Also, Paul Money's at Oklahoma Watch, said, "Oh, maybe we need something," and because 5e Fox has its own Twitter account too, apparently. So, listeners, if you have suggestions on a mascot for Oklahoma Watch and what they could use, I suggest not a bison nor a scissortail flycatcher, but I'm open to other ideas. And so if you will suggest it, I will draw it or get someone else to draw it. Andy Ryan suggested the Oklahoma Wallaby or the Oklahoma Walrus in exchange for Oklahoma Watch. So it's not terrible, but
Wallaby.
Yeah, I'm picturing an Oklahoma Wallaby. I actually held a wallaby at a kid's birthday party about 10 years ago. One of the extreme animals people were there, and they had a wallaby. It was very exciting.
I don't really know what to say about that. So as we kind of move on and start to wrap up here, 538 also has a great project. This is new. This is the first time they've ever done this. You can find this on their website. They've also got it on Twitter, and it's how to vote in the 2020 election. It's a great resource for anyone who's unsure about where and how to vote. So, obviously we're going to be chock full of information and details for you here in Oklahoma about where you can go, if there's polling places closed, when to submit your ballots. But if you want a one-stop shop for any state in the country, if you've got relatives that aren't sure where they're going to vote, if you want to know what's happening in Florida, if you're just curious what states across the country are doing, you can go to projects.538.com/how-to-vote-2020. You can find it on their main site. There's a link to it. Again, great graphics as always, and a lot of great information about where and how to vote, how the registration deadlines, how absentee or mail-in ballots have to be submitted, all kinds of good stuff. So it's one of those deals that, you see those things where you're like, man, that's a great idea. I wish I had thought of that and had the time to implement it if I'd thought about it. That's how I feel about this. It's like I should have done this if I had a free, 6 hours a day.
Right. So let's do like a lightning round of other interesting and important things that have happened in the last week. We'll start with Monday. I'll go on this one. The group People Not Politicians, which I also run, refiled our ballot initiative petition to create an independent redistricting commission. Yes, this is our third time to file it because we filed it last October, then we had to rewrite the gist, and then there was COVID, and so now we refiled it. If you want more information, and I think you should, please go to peoplenotpoliticians.org. not directly affiliated with Let's Fix This, but it is a separate organization kind of doing the work of something that is important to electoral reform. So that happened on Monday. Yesterday, Michael Rogers, who's the Secretary of State, was also the Secretary of Education. I don't even know if I knew we had a cabinet secretary of education. And he's also the governor's, quote, chief policy negotiator, which basically means his liaison to the legislature. And Rogers resigned from 2 of those 3 roles. He resigned as education secretary and policy negotiator liaison. So he retains his position as Secretary of State. And this is interesting to me, Scott, because this is not an elected position. These are all appointed by the governor. I don't know if the governor was aware of this was coming, but one could see a situation where the governor's blindsided and then is pissed that his guy resigned from 2 of the 3 things he asked him to do and then replaces him in that 3rd position.
Yeah. And there have been some high-profile resignations from the governor's office recently. I don't know if this is a trend. I don't know. I don't have a secret mole inside the governor's office. I wish it did. If I did, I would tell you what they said. But I don't know. Sometimes governors did about halfway-ish through an administration. It's not uncommon to see some staff shakeups at this level of government. A lot of these positions are, a lot of these are folks that were making significantly more money in the private sector before they came to work in public service. A lot of them are folks that don't have a lot of experience in public service and may get frustrated with that. So you can see multiple reasons why, and it's just, especially in the middle of a pandemic and an economic collapse, it's exhausting. I mean, it's just exhausting. So you can see why people might choose to bow out, but I do think it's clear, or I should say it's not clear what the kind of underlying cause is with some of these folks that are leaving the administration.
Yeah, I would echo. I think it is somewhat to be expected. And then the folks that are coming in to fill some of these roles. So Brian Bingman, who's a former pro tem of the Senate, is coming in as the chief policy advisor. And last week we talked about the governor's chief of staff, Michael Junk, had resigned. And yesterday, they also announced a replacement for him. The new chief of staff's name is Bond Payne. His name really is Bond. And as Trace Savage points out on Twitter, Mr. Payne's handle is Pork Chop Payne. And so Trace said he's most excited to think that his nickname might be Pork Chop around the Capitol and on Twitter, which I think is... everyone else has very kind of dry Twitter handles, and the fact that this guy comes in with Pork Chop Payne is kind of rad. Maybe he's a big fan of barbecue. That would be exciting.
What else happened this week? I think there was some pretty major news on Tuesday. I think, right?
Is that the board of county commissioners or the?
No, that's when Vice President Biden announced his running mate that he had picked. That he picked Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate on the national ticket. So now we have a full ticket on the left, a full ticket on the right, and we are full steam towards the general election. We've got the Dem convention coming up this weekend and next week, and the Republican convention coming up the week following that. It's going to be a wild 4 months, lots of uncertainty about how the election is going to be conducted. There seem to be some shenanigans happening at the post office. We'll have to talk about that another time, but a lot happening nationally for sure for us to keep our eye on. Yesterday, we had a very, very rowdy budget board meeting for the budget board for Oklahoma County, and a very rowdy county commissioners meeting today.
I will say yesterday's meeting, I understand characterizing it as rowdy, but when I watched the video, it was less rowdy than the tweets I saw about it led me to believe.
All right, that's fair.
It was the part that was weird. Then, there were some notable comments, right, and banter, but the actual meeting was like any other board meeting. It was very boring. Okay, what's next? Item 4, item 5, but then it was punctuated by some very interesting debates. So the meeting only lasted about 30 minutes. The video's on YouTube from their official Oklahoma County feed. And the end result was that the budget board voted to basically take a huge chunk of the federal CARES Act money and just give it to the jail, rather than give it out to organizations or individuals or other government, even other county programs that might need it.
And Andy, when you say a huge chunk, you mean like 98%.
Yeah, it was like $40 million. And what was interesting, like we had Commissioner Carrie Bloomert voted against it. Sheriff P.D. Taylor did too. And he then later kind of came back and said, I just want to clarify and like highlight that I voted no on that. And I assume everyone who voted no is not going to go to prison. And because there is perhaps a non-zero chance that the misuse of those federal funds is illegal in some way and could put the county at risk, I guess. I'm not an attorney. I don't know. And it hasn't been decided, right? This is like a recommendation of the budget board
to go to the Board of County Commissioners, which will vote on it next week. It's so essentially what's the argument that's being made here by the jail trust. And this was, I think Sue Ann Arnall was making this case yesterday at the meeting. What has happened is that there have been a number of inmates that have tested positive for coronavirus. There are a number of inmates that are exposed to coronavirus, either from those other inmates or from other people that work in and out of the jail. When there's an exposure or a positive test, right, those people all have to be quarantined. So they have to be separated from the rest of the prison population, which takes resources, right? The other thing that's happening is that they're not allowed to go to court. So there are all of these inmates that are supposed to be heard in the various courts around the city, and they can't go to court because they're in quarantine for either having coronavirus or being exposed to coronavirus. And so the problem is like building on itself. Like the jail is overcrowded already, and it's getting more overcrowded because of all the backup that they're having to do while they isolate these people. And the jail trust is making the case that this has become a dangerous situation. They don't have the resources to test people as many tests as they need to run. They don't have the resources to isolate people. They don't have the resources to do all the things that they need to do to mitigate this, which I understand. I think is accurate. They probably don't, right? And the jail's underfunded and overcrowded as it is. And so the county has something $46-ish, I think, $44, $46 million that is from the CARES Act that's supposed to be used for like coronavirus relief. And they're opting to, well, the budget board voted yesterday, which includes the county commissioners themselves, opted to recommend that like 42 million, I think, of this sum, 42 or 43 million of these funds goes to the jail trust, and then like 3 million of the remainder, whatever's left, like $3 million goes to like an eviction mitigation program, and then what? But it's like, I mean, like 98% of the money would go to the jail under this plan. What's interesting to me is a couple of things. So one, 36 of the $42 million would go to the jail's general operating fund, right? Like it wouldn't go to like a special account that's dedicated for coronavirus. It would go to like the GR fund, essentially the operating fund that the jail uses. So I'm, again, not a lawyer, but I wonder if you could do that when that is like used for general operations and not specifically for coronavirus relief, number one. Number two, it's just another example. It's one of these things that I rant about on the show all the time, and it's so frustrating. One of the commissioners, Commissioner Kevin Calvi, former state representative Kevin Calvi, was he just in the House or was he ever a senator?
He's just in the House.
Just in the House, yeah. Commissioner Calvi was making the point that, like, I mean, it just, he thought we, one, like, how do we decide what businesses this money is going to go to? How do we decide what nonprofits it goes to? How do we evaluate who qualifies for and gets all this money? And he says, quote, we don't have that capability, was his quote, number one. And then number two, he said, additionally, we shouldn't be using one-time funds to expand government. We should use this money to correct a problem that we already have. So like, this is an example. Like, I don't understand. I mean, I do, but like somebody like Representative Calvi, or Commissioner Calvi, who throughout his tenure in the House expressed complete disdain for government and ranted on and on always about its incompetence. And when he termed out, he promptly went and got another job in government, right? Rather than go work in the private sector, which is like the end all be all of success, I guess. He turned around and got another job in local government, right?
Pays a lot more than his old job too.
Right. And now he says, like, we don't have the capability of this. Well, why the hell not, dude? Why don't you have this capability? Right.
Well, and
like this is like, it's like, that's like if, and again, this is what happens when you put someone in government with a lot of power who doesn't believe that government should do anything. Right. Right. Like you can figure out ways for the county to dole out this money. Right. And then he says that rather than make a hard decision, like, that would involve maybe raising taxes or finding revenue somewhere else, right? Rather than make a difficult decision to adequately fund the jail, he wants to use one-time money that comes from somewhere else so he doesn't have to deal with this problem, right? And says it's because we don't want to expand government. And by expand, and let me be clear, what he means by expand government is provide relief to businesses and nonprofits that are in danger of closing forever because of the economic catastrophe that the virus has wreaked on our community. And it just... like, I mean, you know, Commissioner Carrie Bloomer was like literally in tears yesterday in this meeting because this is, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I believe she essentially called it theft. And I got to say, I have a really hard time disagreeing with that.
Right. I think just to reframe that, if I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think Commissioner Calvi is saying, like, I don't know. I don't know what he's saying by expand government. Like, I get that's like a buzzword. But it is smarter, right? If you've got one-time money to spend it on a discrete expense, it's a one-time expense. However, whether you spend it on the jail or you spend it on other relief to other people, it's still a one-time expense, right? Like, I think he's saying we shouldn't start a whole new program and have, hire staff to do all these things. And, as I've said on the podcast before, when you're working with federal grants and it is one-time funding, sometimes that is difficult. I haven't looked into it yet for the county to know if there's a deadline by which funds have to be spent and,
right, but
and all of that. But regardless, like, I don't think out of the, 1.2 million people or whatever that live in and around Oklahoma County, that the best use of $40 million is for one building whose annual budget is only like $30 million, right? Like, they basically doubled the budget, and it's not like you're doing twice the work. And I don't know if they're even allowed to spend it on things the jail needs, right? Like, the jail needs capital improvements and all this stuff. They do need testing.
Jail needs to be torn down and replaced, is what the jail
right,
needs.
But that's $1 billion,
right?
Which is
not
possible.
Right, it's not possible, but well, I mean, that's a whole other discussion whether it's possible or not. I mean,
with this money,
but, with this money, but like, I guess it's so aggravating to me, right, that the choice here is, instead of giving 400 businesses $100,000 each to maintain payroll for another 3 months, right? And honestly, 100,000 might be generous. I don't know, but like, instead of giving a local restaurant group $100,000 or $150,000 to help them make payroll instead of shutting down one of their stores, right? To give a local theater money so they can maintain payroll instead of closing their doors and try to survive this. What he wants to do is just give all the money to the jail because it's easier. Right? Because it's easier and it forestalls a more difficult decision for him down the road. Right? And because he doesn't think that government money should be used to help people. Like, let's call a spade, right? Like, what Kevin Calvi means when he says we shouldn't be expanding government with one-time funds, I do not believe, if you put a truth serum in Kevin Calvi, that he thinks government money is for helping people. Right? Like, I don't think that's what he thinks it's for. Like, maybe you can use it to build roads and bridges. You can probably use it to buy lots of tanks. But that's about it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like to give an individual business government money is a handout that is interfering with the market, and that's not what government should do.
But these are not market times.
Well, Andy, you know that, and I know that, and I think any sane person knows that. But like, I don't know what other explanation there is.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I don't think it's that he has a sudden like overwhelming concern for the welfare of the prisoners that are incarcerated at the Oklahoma County Jail.
Right.
I mean, do you feel like?
I'm not going to speak to Commissioner Calvi's intentions. I don't know his intentions. All I can judge him on is
I've never met the man, but like I'm just like I'm spitballing based on like his entire record of public service.
Right. we can make a educated guess, but I'm just going to say, intentions aside, the end result, like the decision, the part that we can objectively observe, I think is a bad decision. And it calls into question government handling of the pandemic, which is something we've seen, bungled at all levels, right? Like part of Congress went on recess and they still haven't figured out what to do about unemployment. And just like, it is so frustrating to me when leaders at any level, right? Like government, business, whatever, when leadership has the opportunity to do something, to do the right thing, and then they do the wrong thing. Especially when it's boneheaded, like unforced errors, right? Like there's a great way to help people in a direct way. And for anyone that's an elected official who is choosing to not give people money when they need it, that is undoubtedly going to bite them when they run for re-election, right? So,
I mean, you'd think it would, but I don't think it undoubtedly will. It's just super frustrating because this is money that could do so much to help so many people. People that people that I know, people that all of us know who took a risk, they've started restaurants, they've started, they've started all kinds of businesses that have been just devastated by this. And this could be a lifeline, like maybe it's enough for them to keep their doors open. Maybe it's not, but like it could be enough for another 2 weeks or another month or another 2 months until they figure something out. And to say, no, we're not going to do that because big government, it's just a complete travesty to me and a failure of leadership. And it's bad for our city. And just, it makes me really sad.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, on that sad note,
sorry, Debbie Downer over here.
I think, Scott, I think this podcast reflects the mood of most of our listeners as well, that we're all stressed and anxious and we just don't have the answers. So listeners, thank you for being here. And honestly, for our teacher friends out there, everyone's doing the best they can. I know that you are put in a impossible position and that is unfair to you. And the truth is there's no great answers, right? Like it sucks for schools to open. It sucks for schools to stay closed. Whoever in your life that you can hug, if you've got somebody or an animal, give them a hug and try to get through this weekend. And we'll get back at it next week. We're all going to get through this. There will be a vaccine. It will come out. It will be produced and spread. And by this time next year, fingers crossed, we'll be on at least the tail end of this deal. And so hold tight. You've done great for 5 months. We're here with you. We would love to keep being with you in another 5 months. Someday we'll do another live podcast, and maybe we can even have a group hug or something. How's that sound, Scott?
That sounds delightful.
I looked at our PA system the other day, and I was like, man, that was really fun. The one time we got to use this before it all shut down.
It's just, man, it is crazy. It is just absolutely insane. Do you remember, I'm not saying this to be partisan. It's just illustrative. Do you remember when President Trump got impeached? That was 6 months ago. That's insane. That's insane.
It's been a busy year in many, many, many ways.
One of the things the 538 model is using this year that's different than what they've done before is it's more complicated than this, but they're factoring in news stories and how much big news there is that could move the needle on the polls. And the way that Nate was explaining it, he's like, you could think of it as like, how many times a year does like the New York Times have the big bold type, all the way across the top of the front page headline? He's like, normally, like in a typical year, you would expect that to happen like once, maybe twice. He's like, this year it's happened like 35 times.
Yeah.
Like, it's just insane.
Yeah. All right, then. Well, on that note, thanks for listening. Have a great week. Let's Pod This is produced by Scott and me and Bailey when she's here. And we are a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. Our theme music is artist So Down. The song is called Rhino Funk. You can follow us on social media at Let's Fix This OK. Scott is at SC Melson. I'm at AndyOKC. You can shoot us an email at podcast@letsfixthisok.org. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a tweet, Facebook message, or an email about things you want to talk about, talk more about. Thanks to those of you who have already chimed in. And we'll see you next week.